just to get people in. All right. Hi, everybody. Welcome to the last panel of the day for the inaugural CrimCon event. I hope it's been a worthwhile experience for those who have been able to attend sessions throughout yesterday and today. This is our third prison issues panel. We should have 4 papers today. I'm just waiting to see if all of our presenters are here. Ismail. So we are waiting on one person. So in the interest of time and just making sure that we're all going, we'll skip the first one and float them to the end if they're able to make it. So we will start with the lived experience of sisters with an incarcerated brother. Eman, all of the Emans, the floor is yours. And I should say everybody's got 10 minutes. I will jump in at about minute 9, depending, just to let you know.
All right, I'm gonna go ahead and, can you guys hear me? Share my screen here. Let me know if you see it.
Yeah.
Yep, you're good.
Okay.
Hi, everyone. Welcome to our presentation. Thank you so much for coming. Our presentation is called The Lived Experience of Sisters with an Incarcerated Brother. My name is Eman Tadros. I am an assistant professor at Governor State University in the Division of Psychology and Counseling. I'm a licensed marriage and family therapist. I research incarceration and the impact of incarceration on families and incorporating family therapy into incarcerated settings.
All right, and I am Janelle Fye. I'm a licensed professional counselor and also doc student at the University of Akron, finishing up my PhD and dissertation, hopefully soon. But I am also a sex and relationship therapist, and I work in private practice.
I'm Dr. Amber Ray. I recently graduated from the University of Akron. I'm a licensed professional counselor and marriage and family therapist. I also currently work in private practice and specialize on couples and sexuality.
So this is our presentation overview. I'm just going to go ahead and get started for the sake of time. So prior to conducting our research and doing our study, we found that there was a large emphasis on parent-child relationships while investigating these incarcerated populations. And more specifically, how incarceration affects children of an incarcerated parent. And so although children are a vulnerable population, we knew that incarceration continues to affect other relationships outside the parent-child subsystem. And one relationship in particular being that of the sibling relationship. And we found that this has really gone without any attention in the literature, in which created a dire need for this specific research. So prior to, through our investigation of the literature, we found that there was evidence of psychological effects of incarceration on both the individual being incarcerated and the entire family system in general. We found that it was not fully understood what the lived experience may be from the perspective of the incarcerated person's siblings, their parents, their partners, children, etc. But we also found that there was benefits of social capital and social support for both offenders and their families. Our study highlights the need to encourage family involvement in various subsystems in family, including sibling relationships. We found that older siblings reported feeling a strong sense of responsibility for the welfare and life trajectory of their younger siblings, and that sibling relationships are linked to the disparities in juvenile delinquency between children exposed to maternal incarceration. We also found that there was an important consideration for youth experiencing maternal incarceration, and overall, that the criminal justice and prison systems are truly flawed. There is a learning curve. So when a family member is incarcerated, the whole system may be impacted by the effects of incarceration in the following ways: contextually, financially, emotionally, physically, and psychologically. These challenges may stem from the complex changes that exist within the family overall structure, but it appears that the lack of research involving a subsystem within this structure really lies within the sibling subsystem particularly. The relationship between siblings is really a bond that seems to be unexplored in the realm of incarcerated research. So as far as our method is concerned, phenomenological theory provided the framework for answering our research question, which was, what is the lived experience of a sibling of an incarcerated individual? So we hypothesized that siblings of an incarcerated individual experience various negative impacts due to this experience that is incarceration. We then conducted semi-structured interviews using participants from a Facebook support group. We recruited participants. We gained the approval, obviously, from the admin of incarcerated loved ones. The support group interviewed, memoed, transcribed, coded, then also clustered into themes, coding the what and the how, as well as the context, integrating both textual and structural factors. Oh, we're gonna move my screen. So we found meaning and really created essence through our research. Oops. Okay.
All right, so here was kind of the Venn diagram that we had created to explore the results and the main themes that we found, because they really were mutually influenced. So the 5 that we found were stigma, family impact, adjustment, prison experience, and then all of that was kind of related to the emotional impact the incarceration of the brother had on our participants. All right, so emotional impact refers to the emotional toll, the emotional response that we saw in the participants in reaction to the incarceration of their brother. Various emotions were used to describe this experience, including mixed feelings, loss, grief, feelings of responsibility, and mistrust. We even had a couple who mentioned that this really made them, that their faith was important to them, or that their spirituality was impacted in some way. So some of the examples, I never thought that I would be saying, like, my sibling is in prison. The feelings of responsibility, that was both to not prevent the incarceration, as well as feeling the need to take care of them while they're in prison. So definitely this ownership of responsibility, as well as feeling like they have trust issues with other people in response to the incarceration of their brother. So this came with a big adjustment for our participants, including lifestyle changes that came with the incarceration. So this could be changes in relationship, the pre-incarceration lifestyle, the concerns for what's going to happen after they get out of prison, and then becoming familiar with the judicial system in response to their incarceration. The financial impact of supporting the incarcerated individual was another big adjustment for our participants. So like my dad lost a lot of money for legal stuff to help with everything. This is now delaying his retirement. We went from talking and texting every day to now just emailing as much as we can every day. And then stating that we leaned on each other pre-incarceration before the brother was incarcerated. So the prison experience was also a big one, especially the prison conditions. 14 years out of the 17 that my brother has been in there, he was in the building with no air conditioning. Past 2 winters, he hasn't even had heat. There have been times they kept his medicine away from him, and he has lost over 100 and something pounds being in there. Other concerns for their welfare and health, such as the mental health, and then having 2 hip surgeries while in the prison system. The incarceration had a big family impact, and we saw some big themes with that. So some consequences for the family divide, as well as a change in family communication. Another interesting finding with the family that we found is that 3 out of the 5 participants reported a recent health issue of a parent or the death of a parent around the same time that the sibling got incarcerated or got arrested. So that kind of compounded the emotional impact of the incarceration. So family consequences, he was the biggest important part of my son's life. And when they took him away from my son and kind of talked about the impact there, stating that this teared their family apart, a lack of communication in the family about it, trying to make other siblings understand, and just really not discussing it as a whole in the family. So stigma was a big one, and it was in all levels of the system too. This stigma was felt or experienced within the family, amongst their loved ones, and then also just society and the community as a whole. It was at all levels that they felt this stigma. Some of these examples are false ideologies. So thinking that people in the prison system got it made, they're living the life, but not really understanding the kind of conditions and what they're really dealing with. Feeling like they have to constantly defend their brother to other people. A big one that we kind of struck out at us is, they say they want justice, but what they really want is revenge, but what they really need is forgiveness. And then also secrecy and lies that come from the stigma associated with having an incarcerated brother was a big one that we saw too.
Overall findings have indicated a generally negative experience for siblings to an incarcerated person. The first theme, emotional impact, revealed siblings' distress communication, mixed emotions, feelings of grief and loss, feelings of responsibility, mistrust, and religion or spirituality due to incarceration. All participants explained how it negatively impacted their emotional well-being, and many of them mentioned mistrust or a loss of trust in others after their brother was incarcerated. A loss of trust has been mentioned in other literature. However, it was found that mistrust was formed between the child and incarcerated parent. And in this study, it talks about siblings and how that's a loss in trust in other people. The second theme punctuated adjustments such as financial impact, pre-incarceration, lifestyle, addiction, the criminal justice system, and the change within the sibling relationship. While a family member is incarcerated, many families experience financial hardship due to the cost of commissary, phone calls, and visits, and often this responsibility falls on the co-parents, parents, and siblings. The third theme, prison experience, included prison culture, health concerns, and prison conditions. Participants expressed concern for their loved ones' safety, mental and physical health, well-being, and quality of life. Unfortunately, most correctional institutions lack proper healthcare, security, and rehabilitative efforts. Many incarcerated individuals do not receive appropriate medical, dental, mental, and physical psychiatric care, which not only poses risk to the individual, but all individuals in close proximity. Family impact is the fourth theme, and discuss concerns of health issues of a parent-family divide, family communication, and family consequences. Participants also discussed the divide that had taken place due to their brother's incarceration and the effects it had on overall communication among family members or lack thereof. The fifth theme of stigma emerged in all interviews. Due to the adjustment and judgment, false ideologies, and lack of advocacy, stigma impacts many families and individuals experiencing incarceration. Most participants felt that the need to lie and to keep their brother's incarceration a secret. All siblings share the common goal of advocating for these incarcerated individuals and their families. Limitations more in reference in the gap of literature has multiple implications for policy and mental health treatment. Only 5 participants, so it's really low for phenomenology. Only able to interview females and over the phone, so we can't see like facial reactions and other, hand motions and nonverbals. Self-report, and also that the topic is emotionally evoking for participants, so they might have left out specific information that might be embarrassing or just too emotionally provoking for them. In terms of clinical implications, research has shown that many psychosocial interventions for post-traumatic stress-related events, such as incarceration, have been extremely beneficial when putting it into practice with incarcerated families in these facilities. Unfortunately, there's been a general lack of marriage and family therapists working in these settings or any type of therapeutic services within these settings. This lack of services hinders the ability for siblings to remain in contact or even address issues brought upon or maintained by incarceration with their families. Challenges within the family system may stem from complex changes that exist within the overall family structure, within its rules, hierarchies, and boundaries. And when working with individuals of the incarcerated population, it is important for the clinician to be aware of individual differences and the way society has placed labels upon them. Being incarcerated for any reason has undesirable implications. Stigma can be reduced by knowing and understanding each person's story and humanizing their experience while they're incarcerated. Future directions call for various different research.
Wrapping up, okay? Sorry.
Okay. The sibling relationship is a bond that's overwhelmingly unexplored in the criminal justice research. And a suggestion for future research would be to interview both sisters and brothers within incarcerated settings so that both gender roles and experiences can be explored. And the stigma incorporated in these settings can really be destigmatized with marriage and family therapists and other collaborative efforts. This paper really highlights the importance of further research being conducted within these settings and also speaks to the dire need for MFTs to be involved within providing relational services. Thank you.
Thank you. All right. Our next paper is Dynamics of Jail Population. Ismail and Michael, whenever you're ready, the floor is yours.
Okay, thank you. So I'm Michael Jenkins and presenting with Dr. Ismail Onat. We're both professors at the University of Scranton in Pennsylvania. This project that is part of work that we do with the criminal justice system here in Lackawanna County with the DA's office, the Lackawanna County Prison, and with the police department. It stemmed from a report in January of 2017 in which the Vera Institute published a story that titled, "Why Are So Many People in Jail in Scranton, Pennsylvania?" So of course, we had to figure out what's going on and see what we can offer in terms of some insight about the jail population in our home area. And so this, the data that we'll be presenting today is based on data that we received from the Lackawanna County Prison and shares a little bit of a kind of a snapshot of who is in jail, why are they in jail, and will set the foundation for future research questions about some of the other causes to some of the disparities that were brought out, both in the Vera study and in our numbers that we ran from the jail. The research was funded by the Vera Institute, again, in response to their initial question or their initial findings of the jail population in Scranton and the local area. And so we hope that what we present today will be beneficial to start to answer some of those questions about why, in fact, there are so many people in jail and why we have some of the racial disparities that we see.
Yes. So before doing this study, this research, we looked into the literature to understand what aspects of the jail population we should explore. And there are some definitions and terms that are used in this literature, such as admissions to refer to the bookings of individuals. And then the jail census is for the daily population for people who are being held in a jail on a given day. Length of stay is the difference between the time of booking and the release, and the average daily population is how many people are in jail. Before moving forward, that's also from the literature. So the jail dynamics should be understood in a three-dimensional way. Okay, can you hear me better now? Yeah, so with the three dimensions are the status, jurisdiction, and the charges. So, for example, an individual might be in a jail for pre-trial term, and from a local court or other courts on a new charge or violation, and so this is how those three dimensions interplay. So this is the flow chart for the analysis, again from the literature. This part and this part of this chart is kind of an expansion of the three dimensions that I just explained in the previous slide. So the arguably the jail census is a function of length of stay and the average daily population. Of course, both LOS and the ADP are influenced by the three dimensions. In addition, the ADP is influenced by the charges, the severity of the crime, some individual characteristics, and then the bail amount that the person is expected to set. So based on this literature and based on what data are available at the Lackawanna County Prison, we asked these questions for bookings and the average daily population to understand the overall distribution of the length of stay and the severity of the charges. And for the ADP, we try to understand how long people have been detained and how this vary by severity or charges. And we also looked into the racial proportion and the gender proportion of people who are in jail. So we examined the admissions and releases from the LCP for a population that were in jail as of January 1st, 2018, and until August 27th, which was the date when we obtained the data, and it covered around 20 months. And we excluded the records from other jurisdictions, such as the state, other counties, and the federal government. Based on these criteria, our final data set included around 6,700 records for around 3,400 individuals. The ratio is around 2 records per 1 individual. And on a given day, there were around 393 people in the jail with a average length of stay 63 days. And as of the last day, 387 individuals were in jail. So this illustration is to compare admissions and individuals and their average length of stay. 55% of individuals were in jail in those during these 20 months on 1 booking. 22% of individuals were on 2 bookings, and 23% of individuals were associated with 3 or more bookings, and the average length of stay varied significantly by how many bookings are associated with the individuals. So this is an admissions-based analysis. A date-based analysis suggested that, so this is the most significant part, 8% of all individuals who have been through the jail in the study period, they've been in jail on 3 or more different dates. That means that they entered the jail and then they were released and they came back and released a couple of times. So that illustrates to me that is an indication of the recidivism. So with respect to the gender, 60% of the jail population were female. On the other hand, the female jail population at the national level is 15%, and there is an 11% difference between the national and local indicators. So as far as the race is concerned, our county, almost 4% of county population is African American, but when we looked into the jail, we see that around 22% of all individuals within this study time, they were African American. So those more than 23% of the admissions were associated with those 22% 6% African American individuals who have been through the jail.
We
And
have about 1 minute left.
okay, we also looked into the holds and charges, which I'll quickly explain in here. The top felony charge was the drug-related offenses, and on a given day, you have 35 people in jail. And for misdemeanor, it was the simple assault, and secondly, driving under influence. And on a given day, you're going to find 18 and 14 people on those charges. And court order is another reason why people are in jail more than other type of charges. So conclusions, so no felony charges are the most serious charges, and that make up nearly half of admissions. Length of stay is really large for the felony cases, and that's why we recommend the jurisdictions to think about the case processing time. And some misdemeanor charges, such as driving under influence, should be reconsidered in a way that the pre-booking diversion programs could be applied. That has been done in many different jurisdictions, such as instead of arresting people, they're linking those people with some other services. And men, particularly the male people of color, they were overrepresented in the jail. To understand better this, we're going to continue looking into this subset of the population, what brings the African American jail population into the jail. Yeah, that's the end of our presentation, and thanks for your attention.
All right, thank you. Our next paper is Suppression on Top of Oppression. Janani, if you're there, the floor is yours whenever you're ready.
Thank you. Just give me one moment. I'm just going to pull up my slides.
Okay.
Okay. Can everyone see my slides?
No.
No. Okay, hang on.
I didn't get a notification that you were screen sharing either.
Wait, all right, I think I got it. Here we go. We good?
There we go. Yep.
Okay, thank you so much. All right, thanks everybody. My name is Dr. Janani Umamaheswar. I'm an assistant professor in the Department of Sociology at Southern Connecticut State University. And I'm going to take just a few minutes of your time today to talk a little bit about one of the papers I'm working on called Suppression on Top of Oppression, a symbolic interactionist perspective on the affective experience of incarceration. So the research questions that I am looking at in this project, I'm particularly concerned with how the prison setting generates a negative emotion. What are the social and psychological consequences of men's negative emotions, and how do they cope with these negative emotions? So while much of the penological literature has focused on how incarcerated men present themselves, sort of have to mask their emotion in a hyper-masculine prison environment, I'm less concerned with that masking process, and I'm more concerned with how they cope with these emotions and how these emotions are generated by the prison setting. So the theoretical perspective that I use is identity theory, which is a kind of branch of symbolic interactionism. And an identity standard is kind of the most important concept that I draw on here. An identity standard defines for people who they are as persons, group members, and role occupants. So it basically defines for me who I want to be and how I compare myself to other people. So essentially, I experience positive emotions when what I think of myself corresponds with what others think of me, which in turn corresponds with my identity standard. In contrast, if there is a mismatch between how I think of myself and what others think of me and my identity standard, negative emotions ensue. And so this is the framework that I'm using to analyze how the prison generates negative emotions in incarcerated men. So I draw on in-depth interviews with 24 incarcerated men who were confined at a state-run prison in the Northeast US. And I used the grounded theory method for collecting and analyzing my data, where I collected data, I analyzed it, and then I went back into the field, collected some more, until I reached the point at which continued data collection would not probably yield further new information. So turning to my findings, the affective experience of incarceration, as we can imagine, the dehumanization that accompanies incarceration leads to anger, resentment, and humiliation. And we can see this very clearly in Arnold's quote over here. Arnold arrived at my interview very, very angry. He didn't know where he was supposed to be going. The correctional officers had kind of told him to go to this place, that place, and another place. And finally he arrived, and at one point before he arrived, they had actually forced him to endure a strip search because they claimed that he wasn't where he was supposed to be, even though he had just been following directions. So you can see in the excerpt that I have up on the slide, he talked about how he felt humiliated. And particularly notable in this excerpt over here, he says that it's different. When you have to be strip searched to see your family, you're happy. You got to go through the process. You got to make sure nothing is coming in, but we get caught in being stripped for absolutely nothing. That's ridiculous. So that anger, that resentment, that humiliation accompanies the degradation that comes with prison life. Omar had a very succinct, powerful quote here where he said, prison is oppression and suppression on top of oppression. So what he meant here is that the prison system as it's designed is sort of oppressive. And then you've got people like correctional officers who are frustrated with whatever's going on in their homes or at work, and they take it out on the prisoners. And so they kind of pile on that suppression on top of the oppression. And Omar commented on how he had seen so many incarcerated men kill themselves because they couldn't deal with the oppression and suppression on top of oppression anymore. So those are some of the ways that the prison system generates humiliation, anger, resentment, and sadness. And these are less surprising. So my argument is that in addition to what we already know from the prison literature, which I just, where I covered the findings that are kind of consistent with that literature, here we see that the findings I talk about kind of focus on how men isolate themselves even further in response to these negative emotions that they feel, and that emotions are in some ways an overlooked source of marginalization among incarcerated men. So they feel these emotions and then they kind of separate themselves even further. They distance themselves from their loved ones because they're afraid of their loved ones being humiliated in prison. They're kind of trying to ward off their own shame and humiliation by distancing themselves. And then they're also scared of the threat of further loss of social support. So I have a quote that kind of embodies each of these. So here you can see that Ernest was talking about his grandchildren coming to visit him and how he basically banned them from coming. He told his daughter and her children that he doesn't want them to come to prison. He said, people are very disrespectful. I'm not gonna have my daughter around that. I'm not gonna have my grandkids around that. Let me deal with this thing. When the time comes, granddaddy will come home. So you can see here that even though he cares a great deal about his family, he doesn't want them to come because he's afraid of what they'll have to endure. Jeffrey, on the other hand, was kind of trying to protect himself and his own psychological well-being by distancing himself. He used to just refuse to come out of his cell when loved ones came to visit because he said, I don't want to hear the sadness. When they walk out the door, there's something that takes over and it stays with you for sometimes for weeks, sometimes months, and it's a hurt feeling. So to kind of prevent himself from feeling that hurt feeling, Jeffrey would just sort of refuse to come out of his cell, even if it meant having to miss his loved ones even further. Henry, on the other hand, kind of really captured how the men, to prevent themselves from feeling even more negative emotion, would stop, would kind of distance themselves from significant others outside prison. So he had a partner who had tried very, very hard to maintain contact with him while he was incarcerated. And he basically said that he used to push her away because he thought that would be better than going through all the stuff you got to go through, trying to maintain a relationship behind bars. And you can see that he's so worried about the humiliation in particular, the lying, the cheating, maybe getting involved with another man and not telling me about it. And then you have to hear about it from other people. So to prevent himself from experiencing even further humiliation, Henry just chose to end the relationship and endure the loneliness over the humiliation and shame. So how do incarcerated men incorporate these negative emotions into their self-perceptions? I noticed that there were two narratives that emerged from the data. One were narratives of failure and one were narratives of empowerment. And I take each of these in turn. So narratives of failure were very straightforward. Separation from loved ones meant that their role identities, their roles as fathers, as husbands, as workers, it disrupted their role identities, and as a result evoked sadness and shame that they internalized in feelings of intense failure. So we can see over here, Samuel described how when his wife took his son away from him, at first he was so angry. He said that he would actually have been willing to kill her. And then he said, no, that she was just doing what every good parent should be doing. And he said that I could never play dad to him, even though he had resumed some contact with his child. That's over with. I ruined that. She didn't ruin it. My ex-wife didn't ruin it. I did. So you can kind of see the sense of failure that's evident in his excerpt. On the other hand, how did these men cope with these negative emotions and these feelings of failure? They used a quote unquote morality narrative to distinguish themselves from other incarcerated men and to transform those negative emotions into positive ones by casting themselves as superior to other incarcerated men. We can see this in Arnold's quote over here, where he describes most of the other guys in prison as stuck. They don't want to learn nothing. You never see them reading. You never see them writing. They just sit in front of the TV. They just want to eat and sleep and do recreational things. They're stagnant. And he cast himself as very different from them because he could describe himself as goal-driven and is always trying to improve. And William over here said that he's improved in his patience since being in prison. He was convicted of a sex offense, which meant that he was particularly stigmatized in the men's prison population. And he said, I've also improved on my honesty because I'm not going to be like these people. Damned if I'm going to be like these people. So you see again how he's casting himself as superior to kind of cope with the shame that he's forced to endure because of his conviction and because of the way other people see him, both in prison and outside prison. So the main conclusions, I argue, are emotions are an overlooked source of incarcerated men's marginalization. Their reintegration efforts, in particular, programs that are trying to help incarcerated men reintegrate into society, need to pay close attention to the affective experience of incarceration. So even though we know that that being in prison disrupts bonds that men have with loved ones outside prison, the research hasn't focused nearly as much as it should on what the emotional consequences, what the emotional fallout of these disrupted bonds are. And if we are to kind of help men reintegrate into mainstream society, I argue that we need to be paying more attention to that affective experience that makes them choose to disrupt those bonds, to choose to kind of distance themselves from very valuable sources of emotional support. And in the interest of time, I'm just going to skip over the next slides. Thanks, everyone. I will just, there's my contact information in case anyone wants to get in touch. But thank you very much for your time.
Thank you. All right. So the remaining paper on this panel actually had to pre-record his session because of the time zone difference. So that will be available when we post everything up on YouTube in a few weeks. So that said, we have about 10 minutes for questions for any of our panelists. If you do have anything, please feel free to post that in the Q&A box at the bottom of your screen. We'll take a few minutes for people to post anything there. I want to say thanks for all of our panelists. You're doing really incredible work. It's been like a really amazing experience for me in the last couple of days, getting to meet with people from all over the world, and then also like experience the smallness of it as Ismail and Michael are about 45 minutes away.
Not even.
just up 81. And so
Andy, I just wanted to say thank you for all your hard work with organizing this. I mean, I can't even imagine how much effort went into it. So I'm just deeply appreciative. Thank you.
If you can see the exhaustion radiating from me right now.
You look fine. I'm just saying you must be tired.
We have another board member is in attendance. Bree Beaupre is in the audience too. Thanks to Bree. So we have questions coming for you, Janani. Do you think when the prisoners are released, these conditions have a negative effect on their social interactions, which can lead to them recidivating?
Yes, I absolutely do. In fact, I had one participant talk about how it was a really heartbreaking interview where he had been incarcerated since he was, I think, 16 years old, and he was now 28 years old. And so he had never been even on a first date. He had never gotten to experience any of that because his entire transition to adulthood had been behind bars. And he really worried. He worried that he wouldn't be able to acclimate to life on the outside because he'd kind of been in this emotional upheaval and this state of being forced to distance himself from other people for so long. And other people actually described like they were worried that there would be like emotional and psychological tics that they would carry with them once they were released. So they said everything from just like not being able to open themselves up and be vulnerable to like not having to wear shoes in the shower. they said, I don't know what that's going to be like for us if we go back into society, right, after being in these really oppressive conditions for so long. So I think we should be really worried about how much these men are being forced to endure behind bars, and where people are often not paying any attention to them.
Yeah, I feel like I should just point out that in Pennsylvania, the longest serving incarcerated person has been in since the 1950s, I believe. He is in his early 80s now, and has been was denied parole. I want to say 2019, 2018. Yeah, so do we have any more questions coming in? So I know from past streams today, as soon as I say we're going to start wrapping up and thanking everybody again, is when questions come pouring in. So I guess I'll try to continue that jinx on myself and just say again, thank you to all of our presenters for coming out today. I may have neglected to mention this at the top of the stream. This was, there we go, it worked. Another question for Janani. What follow-up research would you suggest to be done in the future in relation to your own work?
Yeah, thank you. So I think that we should be looking at what prisoners who have, like former prisoners who have re-entered society, what their emotional well-being looks like what does the re-entry process look like? It's kind of building off what I was saying earlier. I think we should be very much centering the perspective of system impacted persons in these conversations. And that's kind of what my research is trying to do. So I think we do a lot of speaking about people who are in prison rather than letting them speak for themselves. And I think if we're talking about something as deeply personal as emotions, I would love to see more of that kind of research being produced, both with populations that are still incarcerated, but also participants who are already outside prison. I also have been curious about what this looks like for women. Especially because from my own research and everyone else who studied mothering, and like we saw over here with people who have brothers who are incarcerated and siblings incarcerated, we can only imagine the gender dynamics that are at play when you consider women's emotions as well, especially in relation to children and separation from children. The men I studied were deeply upset by their disruption, by the disruption of their fatherhood role. So what does this look like for women, where society is telling them that their children should be the center of their identity, and then all of a sudden they don't get to be that person? I think the research has focused on those questions, but I think applying a lens that kind of isolates the question of their emotions would be really important.
It's really interesting that a lot of the guys are upset that their role as dad was disrupted. I mean, were you surprised by that? I would expect that I guess the stereotype would be that a lot of guys would be like, who cares?
Yeah, and that's what's so disheartening, because it is a stereotype. I mean, when I talk to these men, you could not make up the extent of the heartbreak. I mean, men who were talking about how they got to witness their child's first words and then didn't get to see them again until the child was like 16 years old. And so that they were like recollecting the number of firsts that they've missed. It is absolutely a stereotype. And that's why I think this kind of prison research is so important, because there are too many people out there who think that incarcerated fathers just abandon their children and are happy to do whatever, even when they were deeply immersed in criminal activities outside prison. They were still partly doing that because of their roles as fathers. So I think it's really important to like break that dichotomy between people who commit crime and people who are good fathers. You can be both. And then you can be in prison and be neither, but you can also be both even when you're behind bars, right? So I think destigmatizing this population is incredibly important.
Another question, this one is written for you, Janani, but I think it's one that anybody on the panel and probably a few people in the audience can answer. So Maria writes, is there a way that we as the community, or if we have someone we know in prison, can help them realize what your research was about, or how can we help them? I mean, I know that we don't have enough time here, right, to address that question. I think as deeply as it deserves, but I want to open that to the panel. And then if there's somebody in chat that has, or in attendance that has something that you want to add, let me know, and I can let you speak. I can promote you or whatever.
yeah, I just wanted to give other people a chance to address that.
I mean, it's a really difficult question, right? And I think that that's something that, at least on the academic side, that we really struggle with. You know, there was a presentation earlier in another stream about how little criminological research actually does get out into the world, you know, and that the academy as a whole needs to find ways, or our discipline, I should say, needs to find ways to do better at that. So I mean, I think that's step one.
Yeah, one thing that we did after our research is to, Mike and I, we were then op-ed for the local newspaper. And then after this op-ed, I received a lot of letters from the electronic prison. That's an indication that they knew what we were doing. That might be one thing that people may want to think about their research, to write a follow-up op-ed about the findings to summarize and reach out to the larger audience.
Yeah, which is like totally valuable. I just wish that tenure and promotion valued op-ed rating, you know. I'm sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off, Eman.
I was just thinking dissemination of research. So one thing would be social media. That's one way, using like hashtags, a conference like this where people can repost and actually get this information to the general public, because it's great to talk about it with other scholars and, you know, our colleagues, but we really want this communication of science to be to the general public. And I think sometimes in academia, we forget about that. And especially with what we are studying and the people we are working with and studying, we should be promoting this information to people it's actually going to affect, such as like the families and the communities at large. So why aren't we promoting this more so on platforms where we're going to be heard and actually have that profound effect?
Yeah, you know, both of the other presentations on this panel, you presented really interesting work that, I mean, frankly, you could talk about at a dinner party, right? I mean, when it comes to, you know, when we open back up and we have dinner parties and cocktail parties, I mean, have these conversations, and people are interested in your work. People are interested, you know, we're not talking about things that are not related to everyone's everyday life. And I think related to that, we have, you know, we forget that the system, criminal justice system, is what it is because we allow it, right? And so we sanction the policies in the system by who we vote for, the budgets that we allow our municipalities and our counties to pass. And so even just taking on that kind of an activist approach, whether it be within our own social groups or a little bit more officially with the cachet that you all have with your backgrounds, is a way that we could also get involved in making sure that the word is getting out about what science says about the best way to do things.
Yeah, I mean, if you live in a state or you live someplace where judges are elected, where sheriffs are elected, pay attention to those elections, right? And try to educate yourself. And I know it's difficult because in those campaigns usually fly really far under the radar, and it's oftentimes difficult to find out about those candidates. It just means you have to kind of put in a little bit more work for it. And you know, the district attorney races too, where you live, can have a really profound impact on what the legal system and the justice system looks like where you live. So we are out of time. Thank you again, everybody, for your amazing work. That this concludes our broadcast day, I guess. I almost said the stream will reboot for the next one. I hope everybody's been enjoying CrimCon. Thank you, everybody, for coming out this afternoon, or whatever time it is, wherever you are. And I hope to see a lot of you for day 3 tomorrow. Take care, everybody.
Thanks again, Andy. And thank you to Bree, too.
Good job, everyone. Thank you.
Bye.